Box 8690 Derby DE1 9TT. UK only. Entrance must be 18 or over. Lines close at 6 p.m. on the 7th of March. Please check the closing time if listening or watching on demand. Good luck.
Hi, I'm Michelle Dewberry, and my show is your opportunity to cut through all the noise and dive in headfirst to some robust debates. Ideas clash.
Situation, isn't it?
No,
because the failure is
you're deliberately avoiding my point. Nothing's held back.
And if you think this is the end of it, wait for more.
And we do not shy away from the difficult stuff.
Sometimes I want to shake people and say, if only you understood.
So join me on Dubes & Co. weeknights at 6 p.m. only on GB News, Britain's news channel.
Join me, Camilla Tominey, for a frank and honest discussion with those in power that cuts through the spin and gets to the heart of the issues shaping our nation.
You haven't confirmed that you want to stand as leader, but you haven't ruled it out either.
This report basically says that he's not fit to stand trial. Is he indecisive? Incompetent?
I deliver the dose of reality Westminster needs. That's the Camilla Tominey Show at 9:30 every Sunday on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
It's Patrick Christie's Tonight, and here we do things differently.
It's explaining the absolute madness of this, doesn't it?
It's explosive. I mean, this is very good. It's lively.
850. Your government sat there, Sean, and he did nothing.
It's controversial.
And the Middle East has been in turmoil since before I was born.
It's everything you need to kickstart your evening.
Everyone's had their Weetabix tonight. I love to see it.
That's Patrick Christie's Tonight, weeknights from 9 p.m. Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Good Afternoon Britain isn't just about us. The wonderful thing about this programme is it's about everyone watching. It's an interactive programme.
Well, there absolutely is something to see here, and we're going to be talking about it more. Whether it's breaking royal news, Will, please bring us up to date, or indeed a particularly punchy speech in the House of Commons.
Very, very curious.
We bring it to you live, and then we bring you live reaction as well.
That's Good Afternoon Britain, weekdays from midday.
Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Hello and good evening. I'm Christopher Hope, GB News' political editor, covering State of the Nation tonight. Coming up, we'll be going live back to CPAC in America in just a moment to discuss the widening rift between the Trump administration and Europe over Ukraine. I'll also be speaking to the architect of the Doge dividend. That's a plan to pay a tax rebate to American citizens based on savings made by Elon Musk's department. Meanwhile, a Sudanese migrant has dodged deportation after judges overruled the Home Office's claim that he wasn't a child, in spite of its claims that he had a receding hairline. Plus, in light of some of the most horrific violent crimes we've seen over the past year or so, I'll be joined by a former BBC journalist who's made it his mission to answer the question, why do people kill? That's State of the Nation. It starts right now. I'm also joined by my panel, contributing editor of Environment Media, Michael Walker, and assistant comment editor at the Daily Telegraph, Poppy Coburn. As ever, let me know your views via gbnews.com/your say. But now it's time for the news with that great man, Sam Francis.
Very good afternoon, very good evening rather, to you. And the top story from the newsroom just after 8 o'clock. The UK and Norway have signed a landmark declaration to forge a major new agreement and step up defences against growing Russian threats. The Defence Secretary has been in Norway today amid warnings that Russia has long developed the ability to sabotage critical underwater systems and could use it in a future conflict. Both nations are tightening intelligence sharing, ramping up military training and deploying cutting-edge surveillance to detect potential attacks beneath the sea. Well, speaking earlier at a joint press conference, John Healey's also vowed to step up further support for Ukraine and said we must keep them in the fight.
Our job is to stand with the Ukrainians, support the Ukrainians, support them in their fight, and if they choose to talk, support them in the negotiations as well. And I'm a defence minister, and I don't want to see us jeopardising the peace by forgetting the war.
Meanwhile, Reform UK leader Nigel Farage has hit back at current President Donald Trump, defending the Ukrainian president, saying he's not a dictator. Trump had previously used the term to describe Volodymyr Zelensky, urging him to negotiate quickly with Russia or risk losing his country. While speaking on GB News earlier, Mr Farage said you should always take everything Donald Trump says seriously, but not always literally.
Let's be clear, Zelensky is not a dictator, but it's only right and proper that Ukrainians have a timeline for elections. I mean, after all, I recently said that I thought Keir Starmer was behaving like a dictator because we've cancelled the vote. He's cancelled the vote of 5.5 million people in local elections on May the 1st this year. So no, he's not a dictator, but there needs to be a timeline so that the Ukrainian people can vote on a peace deal.
Well, let's just turn away from news regarding the Ukraine and turning to breaking news from the Middle East. There is a suspected report of a terror attack in Israel, where 2 empty buses have exploded in a parking lot in the south of Tel Aviv, the Israeli capital. These are the latest pictures just into us from social media, showing the scene of the charred remains of those 2 buses, flames tearing through the vehicles tonight, with firefighters racing to contain that blaze. Reports suggest no one has been hurt, but local media saying police are now investigating the cause of the blazes, with the city's mayor also warning that searches and security precautions are underway. A possible manhunt also underway, according to local reports. As you can see there, dramatic scenes of that blaze on those 2 buses. Authorities at this stage, though, in Israel saying it's unclear what has triggered those 2 blasts. We'll keep across any details and bring it to you. In other news, the number of suspended sentences for knife possession here in England and in Wales has hit a 10-year high, with nearly 3,900 convictions leading to suspended terms just last year. It comes as ministers have unveiled new anti-knife crime measures, including forcing retailers to report bulk sales and tougher sentences for selling illegal blades. The rise in suspended sentences also coincides with a record-high Crown Court backlog, which has nearly doubled in just 5 years. That's the news on GB News. I'll be back with you for a full roundup of all the top stories at 9 o'clock. Now, though, back to State of the Nation.
For the very latest GB News direct to your smartphone, sign up to News Alerts by scanning the QR code or go to gbnews.com/alerts.
Welcome back to State of the Nation with me, Christopher Hope. Now, here was Vice President J.D. Vance's criticism of Europe today.
I'm not even blaming the Europeans. I'm actually saying you follow the lead of Joe Biden into censorship and mass migration. Follow the lead of Donald J. Trump, and that's free speech, borders, and sovereignty.
That came after what appears to be a widening rift between the US and Europe on the Russia-Ukraine negotiations. Here was Reform UK Nigel Farage appearing to disagree with his good friend Donald Trump on GB News earlier today.
You should always take everything Donald Trump says seriously. You shouldn't always take things that Donald Trump says absolutely literally. Zelensky is not a dictator, but it's only right and proper that Ukrainians have a timeline for elections.
Well, GB News understands that Sir Keir Starmer is now offering to host a Downing Street summit for European leaders to discuss the European response to Donald Trump's attempts to end the war in Ukraine. I'm joined now live from CPAC by Fox and Newsmax commentator and advisor to various US senators and former political consultant to Boris Johnson, Thomas Corbett-Dillon. Thomas, thanks for joining us tonight. Great to see you.
Yes, good to be here. Thanks for having me.
Is Nigel Farage right? We shouldn't really take Donald Trump literally when he describes Zelensky, who's elected, as a dictator.
Well, I think if you went around this conference, for example, and asked most of the people here, they would agree with the president that Zelensky is a dictator, because it is a fundamental belief of the American people that elections should be held regularly every 4 years here. You know, they held elections here during the Civil War, during the First World War, during the Second World War. They always hold elections, and the fact that Zelensky is not willing to have elections does not play well with the American people here. So I think you would find a lot of the people actually do agree with the president, that they're not too happy with Zelensky.
Come off it, Thomas Corbett-Dillon. He's got a quarter of his country under the control of Russia. How can he have fair elections given that? And let's not forget about Winston Churchill delaying elections during the Second World War. He's doing exactly what you're meant to do if you're fighting, frankly, for your existence as a country. He's trying to deal with the threat from without before dealing with the democracy within.
Well, you may think that, but the American people do not agree with that. They don't believe in that. And the fact is, do the Ukrainian people not have a say? Do they just have to stay in an endless war because they don't get a vote? The American people here believe that regardless of the situation, they should be having elections. So the president is speaking on behalf of the majority of Americans that voted for him. And throughout the campaign, from day one, he has said he will end the war in Ukraine. And that is what he's doing. He is going out there trying to be the president of peace, as they're saying. And for some reason, the UK and Europe are standing in his way. The deal is going to be done regardless of what the UK and Europe think.
But Thomas Corbett-Dillon, at what cost will peace be done? I mean, Donald Trump appears to be giving away most of the negotiating hand to Vladimir Putin already. Or is there a secret plan to somehow stitch up the Russian leader?
I mean, what do they expect to do? This idea that Kiev is going to send British troops, do they really think they're going to push back the Russians and get that land back? The war is over. No one is moving. The borders are not changing now. It's basically been done for the last 2 years. And the fact that it's still going is just the death of hundreds of thousands of men unnecessarily. President Trump is going to end this war. And the fact that the British government is standing in the way is really quite confusing, I think.
How on earth is the UK government standing in its way? I mean, we're trying to be, as a country, I think, the bridge between Donald Trump and the European Union. I think next week, the leader here goes over to America, Sir Keir Starmer, trying to make the case for how to get a deal on Ukraine's terms.
He's suggesting sending British troops to Ukraine. I mean, what is that really? That is a declaration of war against Russia. What are they going to do in the Ukraine if they're not fighting Russian troops? He is not, absolutely it is. He is not standing, he is standing in the way of peace. Peace should have been done, and President Trump is leading the charge on this. And the fact that it's taken this long is actually outrageous.
You know very well, don't you, that any UK troops going there will be to enforce a peace after a deal is signed, not to fight with Russians. That is made very clear by the government here.
I think the deal is going to be done, this whole idea that the UK is going to offer to hold talks or whatever. The Americans don't care. And here's the thing, the Americans are so sick of being preached to by liberal elites from Britain, from Europe. And you know what has really upset them recently is that this US aid audit, they found that all of these pundits that, you know, say how awful America is, are being funded by the American taxpayer. Rory Stewart's wife paid $1 million by the US taxpayer to sit on his stupid podcast with Alistair Campbell and say what an awful man President Trump is. The Americans are so sick of hearing from the Brits and the Europeans. I think you're going to realize that's changing very quickly.
Thomas Corbett-Dillon, you have fun at CPAC, you take care there, and of course Roy Stewart's not here to defend himself, but thank you for joining us tonight. Now I'm joined for reaction in the studio by contributing editor to Novara Media, Michael Walker, and an assistant comment editor at The Telegraph, Poppy Coburn. Michael Walker, to you first. What do you make of that?
Very embarrassing. I mean, listening to Donald Trump, you know, I disagree with most of what he says. I think it's often quite incoherent, but at least you kind of believe that he believes it. Now you're seeing sort of all these talking heads, this, you know, with all due respect to him, this sort of fairly posh English man who sort of just suddenly believes everything.
Don't attack the man. What was he saying?
Well,
come on, what was he saying?
What he was saying is anything Donald Trump says. You know, like, what I want to know is, does he believe what he's saying, right? Clearly, Volodymyr Zelensky is not a dictator, right? Does that man really believe that Winston Churchill was a dictator? No.
Yeah.
You put the point well, right? Which is that his country has just been invaded. Of course, he's not going to have elections. And Donald Trump clearly
controlled by Russia, or a quarter.
And clearly, Donald Trump isn't saying this from some sort of political science analysis, where he's like, I think actually they should have elections. That's not how he thinks.
Poppy Coburn, has Donald Trump lost the room?
I mean, look, you know, that the whole Trump idea on the Ukraine war was that we're opposing the regime of woke American imperialism, and now they're just doing American imperialism, but like from a base perspective, which is interesting. I would say, though, like to slightly defend what was being said, even if it wasn't said with complete sincerity.
Oh, no, sure it was. Don't question him. Just argue what he said.
There is a real legitimate point to be made here about what the UK's role has been in the Ukraine war, and particularly the role of Boris Johnson, which really, you know, I think
as
the
a
Prime Minister
cheerleader for getting Europe involved.
Well, I'm sorry, this war could have ended 2 years ago if Boris Johnson hadn't gone on the way and blocked that deal. I'm sorry, the UK was playing a foundational role in telling the Ukrainians to fight on and saying that Europe would defend them, knowing that we did not have the troops to do so or the will.
Michael Walker, it's our fault it's come over 2 years ago to pop.
Well, I do think there is a point there. I mean, I think there's very reasonable people who disagree about the origins of this war. Now, obviously, Putin is to blame. It's Putin who did the illegal invasion. But I do think there is a strong argument that, to some degree, the West led Ukraine on.
By expanding eastwards with NATO membership maybe and EU membership
by pretending to the Ukrainians that we were going to admit them to NATO. If we'd admitted 5 years ago, of course you're not going to join NATO, then maybe they could have come to some agreement before almost 1 million people died. Now, again, we need to be clear who's to blame for this war is Vladimir Putin. That doesn't necessarily mean that everyone has behaved reasonably up to now.
Yeah, you know, I completely agree. Also, we have to be serious about what the role of Europe in this war actually is. It's very easy to say we're taking leadership. How dare Donald Trump say these things? By the way, I think these dictator comments, these like personal attacks on Zelensky are disgusting. But I'm sorry, I think there's something actually much worse, which is, again, misleading a country that is losing hundreds of thousands of its men in a war where the borders have basically not moved for 2 years. This is an attritional war.
So perhaps Trump was right then to shake it up and say, right, let's do something to make it end.
The war has to end. These are probably going to be terms that are deeply unfavourable. I think Ukraine is going to be completely torn asunder from inside, from the people who don't want these terms and the people who still want to fight on. The people, you know, it's a complete nightmare scenario. But like, what's the alternative? More men die?
Yeah, I think there, Michael. I mean, it comes from so he goes back to the beginning here. Trump says, "I want to end the killing." Now we all agree with that, don't we? End the killing. Is this the way to go about it? Is there a secret plan to stitch up Putin somehow in this?
Well, I think going to peace talks now it makes sense. You know, the war is at a stalemate. I agree with you that basically people are dying for no good reason now. If I were Ukrainian, what I'd be very concerned about is that Donald Trump has basically conceded all of the points before the negotiations start.
That's what it looks like.
When you go into a negotiation, you want to keep some of your cards closer to your chest, whereas he said they can have all the territory, Ukraine's got to get a new leader, and obviously what Vladimir Putin wants is for Ukraine to basically collapse.
What do you want to see next week from Keir Starmer when he goes to the US to meet with Trump? The first EU leaders have a press conference with him, you know, all the razzmatazz have a trip to the White House.
I'm going to have to agree with your guest here and say that I don't really think there's much that Keir Starmer can actually do. I mean, the idea that Donald Trump is going to be changing any of his positions because a Prime Minister of a European country, which he does not particularly like, has asked him to, without willing to actually commit money or troops to the operation. You know, good luck to him, but it's probably not going to do anything, is it? Let's be honest.
Michael, thanks for now. Stay where you are, of course. Now, I'm going back to CPAC in America. I'm joined now by the architect of what's called the Doge dividend. He's called James Fishback. He's the CEO of investment firm Azoria. James Fishback, welcome to GB News tonight. Can you briefly explain what on earth is a Doge dividend, please?
Well, Christopher, good evening to all of our great allies in the United Kingdom. A Doge dividend is very simple. You take 20% of all of the money that Doge saves under President Trump's leadership, and you give it back to the same people who sent it to DC in the first place in the form of a refund check. Why a refund? Because they sent their money to Washington, DC for Americans to be spent with responsibility, with honesty, and with efficiency. It turns out the $2 million that was sent to Mozambique for circumcisions, or the $5 million sent to Myanmar for a DEI musical, was not honest, not fair, or not efficient. The American people deserve a refund. But more than that, more than just compensating them, Christopher, we also have to incentivize them. This is what President Trump said about our proposal on Air Force One yesterday. He said that it's going to incentivize Americans to call out and report waste, fraud, and abuse that they see in their communities. And as a result, Doge will save even more, and the Doge dividend will be even bigger.
I'll just remind viewers that Doge stands for the Department of Government Efficiency, and it's a new department established for Elon Musk, the world's richest man. Would it not be, I mean, it sounds like a great idea if it works. Would it not be better to try and incentivise government officials to make those cuts as much as incentivise taxpayers to alert those officials about the issues?
Well, I'm sorry to say that Congress has been asleep at the wheel, both Republicans and Democrats, because they knew all this money was being spent. In many cases, they authorized it themselves. I'm sorry to our friend Rory Stewart, but Congress authorized that money to Turquoise Mountain. And so it wasn't until Doge stepped up that we identified that waste in the first place and cut it out. So I'm sorry to my friends here in DC. Congress is part of the problem. Doge is a ruthless entity. They are rolling up their sleeves. They are working under President Trump's leadership to find any waste, fraud, or abuse and cut it out. And guess what? They've been able to do that with Trump's leadership, Elon's execution, and a dozen engineers eating Chick-fil-A and drinking Red Bull. Let's take it a step further, Christopher. Let's give every American, 100 million American adults, let them be the eyes and ears of government efficiency, whether they're in East Palestine or East Baltimore. Call up Doge and say, I see waste, I see fraud, I see abuse. Doge saves that money and then delivers a portion of that, 20% of that, back to the American taxpayer in the form of a dividend.
What's your estimate, James, on the size of that dividend check, and when will it be dropping into the pockets of Americans?
Yeah, the math's real simple on this one, Christopher. Doge will save $2 trillion by our estimates here at Azoria. That 20% of that is $400 billion. $400 billion divided by the 79 million tax-paying American households means that every American would be able to have a check for $5,000 when Doge is done next year. And that check will have President Trump's name and signature on it, because without his leadership, this would not have been possible.
Well, James Fishback, it's been great to hear your plans for Doge dividends. It might even work. I wonder what we might do. What's your advice to the UK? Should we follow your advice?
Well, my advice to the UK is first, throw Labour out. And second, to go in there and uproot the blob. Get rid of the blob. We call it the deep state here, but I understand you call it the blob. Get rid of the blob and do your own Doge dividend out there and give the money to the hardworking people all across the United Kingdom.
But there is an Office of Government Efficiency Labour's established. Let's see if it's as crusading as your Doge dividend group. Thank you for joining us again from DC. Thank you for joining us tonight. Now, after the break, I'll be revealing an early peek at my podcast, Chopper's Political Podcast. I spoke to Michael Gove, making some interesting remarks about Nigel Farage's Reform UK Party. Don't go anywhere.
This is Britain's Newsroom, where your voice matters.
It's just astonishing. With expert analysis and honest opinion, we don't just keep you informed.
We bring you unique perspectives you won't see anywhere else.
Can't argue with any of that. When the news happens, it happens here.
On Britain's Newsroom, weekdays from 9:30 a.m.
Only on GB News.
Lee Anderson's Real World, Fridays from 7 p.m.
Getting into medicine at a very early age, you had an interest when you were really, really young, didn't you?
I did. I decided to go to medicine when I was 8. And that was based on the stories my father used to tell me about my grandfather, who I never met, because my grandfather died when he was 11.
Yeah.
And he was in the military, and he was stationed up in the Himalayas, and he was a doctor in the military. And not only did he serve in the military, but he also served his patients. And he served them to the degree where he would go out and he'd take them supplies, and he'd really look after them and make sure that they were not just well, but could live and survive. And it was on a day when he was out there helping his patients. There was a storm up in the Himalayas.
Wow.
And he was out there taking blankets and clothes and food up to them. And on the way back, as he was coming down the Himalayas, there was a landslide which took his Jeep over the edge, and he perished in that. So he gave his life to his service. And it was these stories about my grandfather, what he did and how he helped people, that really inspired me to follow in his footsteps. Not necessarily to go into the military, but to go into medicine.
But he's left a wonderful legacy, because fast forward, you came to this country when you was 4, and you've studied medicine.
Yep.
And you do, we were talking earlier about DNA. You know, you're looking at DNA, looking at people's DNA. You can do profiles on people, predict. Well, you can actually say with some accuracy where they've lived in the past, what jobs they've done, and what medically may happen to them in the future.
Yeah, yeah. And I think, you know, over the last, I mean, we've been looking at the gene. There was a human genome project last century which finished.
GB News, the People's Channel.
In the GB Newsroom, we bring you the news as it happens.
With our team of dedicated journalists across the UK,
we're ready to keep you up to date with what's happening every half an hour, every single day. Bulletins here on GB News,
the People's Channel,
Britain's news channel.
I'm Christopher Hope. From pop stars to politicians, I'll interview anybody in a pub who's got a political opinion. Join me every Friday on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, YouTube or gbnews.com, or wherever you get your podcasts.
This is GB News, the People's Channel.
Welcome back, and now time for an early peek at my podcast, Chopper's Political Podcast. And this week's guest was none other than Michael Gove, the former Tory MP and Cabinet Minister, now editor of The Spectator. I asked him this question about how Kemi Badenoch is dealing with the threat of Reform UK. Here's what he had to say.
Thatcher never had that rival on the right that Kemi does. So it's important that the Conservative Party, I think, makes a mature judgment about how to deal with reform. And I think that judgment has to be, you can't do reform in terms of the anger that they articulate, and there's a lot of legitimate anger out there. Where you can do better than reform is in the answers to the different questions we face. And my analysis is that the policies that Kemi put forward the other week, particularly on immigration, particularly on indefinite leave to remain, were the most detailed propositions, solutions, I think, to some of the problems that we face that any party leader has put forward so far.
That's Michael Gove talking to me earlier this week on Tuesday. With me now is my panel, contributing editor to Novara Media, Michael Walker, and his assistant comment editor at The Telegraph, Poppy Coburn. Poppy, is Michael Gove right that Kemi Badenoch has got time? He praised, didn't he, this issue of earning your citizenship for twice as long, 10 years, not 5 years, for people to arrive here. He's praising, I mean, he always backed to Kemi Badenoch previously. He's praising her again. Has she got time? It's not working in the polls, let's put it that way.
I think if Kemi Badenoch was a generational political talent, even then, she would really struggle to actually pull the Tories out of this. And just to be clear, I do not think she is a generational political talent. I think the thing that people don't realise, and this is really something you realise when you go out to the doorsteps and actually talk to people, is the name Conservative Party is so irredeemably, I think, damaged by what has happened in the last 5 years.
Across
really.
all, I mean, your age group,
I mean,
definitely.
certainly, I mean, anyone under the age of 50, basically,
Right.
that's true. You know, Kemi's whole push has been that we're not going to offer policies, we're going to get the internals of the party together, and we're going to go as one kind of unified unit into the future. Well, that's impossible because half your party hates the other half of the party. So unless you purge it into an even smaller number of MPs, you can't do anything. And if you propose new policies, which, again, she has not really been very willing to do, again, I think, as Michael said, you're just essentially going to be repeating what Reform are doing. So I don't really see a way out of this for her, and I don't really think she's trying very hard either.
Michael Walker, let's think back to Labour. Jeremy Corbyn, you know, the pressure from the left, he was elected, the Momentum group on the left of Labour. Is there a read across towards that with the Tory party now? You've got this kind of being pulled leftwards and then almost unelectable.
Well, I think the big difference is, I mean, I think 2017, Corbyn had an offer that people didn't seem to mind. I think some of the economic answers he gave were reasonable, but obviously we're not going to go over those hot coals again. But, I mean, I think that was quite a lot of cope from Michael Gove, really. And the issue is they had 14 years in government. Michael Gove was in cabinet through most of it, you know, in and out sometimes. And what was sort of the key vision, let's say, of the first bunch, which was Cameron and George Osborne, which was to fix the roof while the sun was shining. And what did they do? We had a decade of incredibly low interest rates, and they didn't invest anything, which means that the country is completely crumbling. Now everyone's woken up to the fact that nothing works, but interest rates are really high.
They were trying to cut debt, weren't they? That was the idea.
But what they've done is crush productivity, right? What you should do when interest rates are low is invest. What they did was cut when interest rates were low. Didn't make any sense. Then the second bunch said, let's get Brexit done so we can lower immigration, and then had record immigration. Now, I'm quite liberal on immigration, but that's not doing what you promised.
Poppy Coburn, how long has she got? Because it's not working in the polls.
One more year.
Really?
I think 1 year, and then it's going to be the Tory regicide option appearing again. Who is actually going to be the leader? I'm not sure. I mean, the person everyone's going to look to, obviously, is going to be Robert Jenrick. Like, perhaps we can beat the Reform Party by getting a Reform-light leader
by merging,
of the party.
Or wouldn't he want to merge, possibly? It's been talked about.
I think some people want to merge in the party. Again, about half of those MPs, maybe a quarter, if we're being more pessimistic about the chances for the party. But even so, I mean, why would Reform join with 20 or so MPs who are from a discredited party?
The big worry, of course, of the Tories is it's not the bottom. 121 MPs could be a midpoint as it descends into the abyss.
Oh, I mean, 100%. Yeah, I mean, what have they got to offer? No, I think they are absolutely going to collapse. I mean, I'm not necessarily licking my lips because I don't really sort of welcome the prospect of a Reform government. I don't think they have
You'd
much
rather
to...
the Tories than Reform?
Well, I don't... I mean, rock in a hard place, isn't it? I mean, the issue with Reform is that I don't think they've done much policy work. I mean, the one thing they put out the other day on Twitter, which seemed to be their first concrete policy, was we're going to make green energy much, much more expensive.
Well, that made no sense. There were two new taxes for a low-tax party.
Yes.
I mean, I guess that's the point that Michael Gove is saying, is that the policy we have, the only policy which hasn't been in response to Labour policy, because the Tories have so far said they'll reverse the tax on private schools, and I think there's another one too, I forget what it was. But the one that...
School phones in schools.
But the one they are talking about is this one about citizenship, which I felt actually was an attempt at clearing up the mess they made. The so-called Boris wave, the net migration surge under the last Tory government, dealing with if they'll become Britons or not and how they earn that right, is clearing up your own mess, and I think that deserves respect.
It deserves respect in that I agree that I think it would be an improvement on the current situation. But again, this is a pretty gigantic mess we're talking about here. And again, half the party are not on board with this new anti-immigration posturing, and that is the problem going forward. They are not Reform. Reform can benefit from everyone agreeing with each other.
Michael, what is Navarro Media's advice for Kemi Badenoch?
For Kemi Badenoch, I wouldn't want to be her advisor. I'd say... think about a new career.
That's a bit mean. What's your advice? Let's go.
Oh, you can always write for us if you like, Kemi.
She does a lot of that.
Yeah, take up a new career as a writer, but I don't know. Good luck with the politics. I wouldn't want to be her.
OK, look, Michael Walker from Navarro Media, thank you, and Poppy Coburn for Telegraph, thank you again, of course. In a moment, as a third of businesses could begin cutting staff, I'll be speaking to Matt Ridley, a former member of the House of Lords, who has warned Britain is on the brink of destitution. Don't go anywhere.
Dinner under the stars tonight?
That reminds me of our travel insurance.
You mean all clear skies?
All Clear Travel Insurance sponsors GB News Travel Destinations forecast.
Hello, if you're looking for any winter sun, it's going to be wet as we end the week in Portugal, fine in Italy, unusually cold in Greece. Through the Greek islands, we've got this northerly wind blowing, 6 Celsius in Athens, just 7 for Mykonos, that's 8 degrees lower than average. But for Italy, mostly fine with sunny spells, although for Portugal, we've got a spell of rain moving in, and as that crosses Iberia, that's going to turn to showers at the weekend, whilst temperatures gradually recover in Greece.
All Clear Travel Insurance sponsors GB News Travel Destinations forecast.
Join me, Nana Akweer, for an informative, interactive news programme with a difference. It's fun.
No, you didn't say that, Dave.
I'm so surprised.
I think there's an element of truth to that.
Join me from 3 p.m. every weekend, only on GB News, Britain's news channel.
Mornings don't have to be tiresome,
especially if you have the right company.
Wake up to news as it happens, opinion and debate, and of course, a little bit of entertainment too.
Because when the kettle's on, we're on.
That's Breakfast on GB News, a show worth waking up for.
Every morning from 6 a.m.
Only on the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
We'll spread the news, you spread the word.
Hi, I'm Michelle Dewberry, and my show is your opportunity to cut through all the noise and dive in headfirst to some robust debates. Ideas clash.
Situation, isn't it?
Because
the failure is
you're deliberately avoiding my point. Nothing's held back,
And if you think this is the end of it, wait for more.
and we do not shy away from the difficult stuff. Sometimes I want to shake people and say, if only you understood. So join me on Jubes & Co. weeknights at 6 p.m. only on GB News, Britain's news channel.
Good Afternoon Britain isn't just about us. The wonderful thing about this programme is it's about everyone watching. It's an interactive programme.
Well, there absolutely is something to see here, and we're going to be talking about it more. Whether it's breaking royal news, Will, please bring us up to date. Or indeed a particularly punchy speech in the House of Commons.
Very, very curious.
We bring it to you live, and then we bring you live reaction as well.
That's Good Afternoon Britain, weekdays from midday.
Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
If you want your news to be straight talking,
This is the nightmare for the Conservatives again.
down to earth,
It's not just Nottingham where this is happening, is it?
and most importantly, honest,
Hard-working, middle-class taxpayers, they'll get their book thrown at them.
then catch me, Martin Daubney, Monday to Friday, 3 till 6 p.m. on GB News, Britain's news channel.
It's Patrick Christie's Tonight, and here we do things differently. It's explaining the absolute madness of this, doesn't it? It's explosive. I mean, this is very good. It's lively.
850. Your government sat there, Sean, and it did nothing.
It's controversial. And the Middle East has been in turmoil since before I was born. It's everything you need to kickstart your evening. Everyone's had their Weetabix tonight. I love to see it. That's Patrick Christie's Tonight, weeknights from 9 p.m. Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Headliners on GB News 11 p.m. every night. It's got 3 top comedians going through the next day's newspapers so you don't have to read them, which is great.
That's a good point. He's lying, and maybe he's not lying.
That's Headliners every night from 11 p.m. and 5 a.m. as well on GB News, Britain's news channel.
Welcome back to State of the Nation. Now, a new poll by the Federation of Small Businesses has revealed a third of companies are expecting to axe jobs amid soaring employment costs, with Labour's hike to employer national insurance and planned employment rights charters worrying them. This development merely builds on the growing sense of economic doom in this country. Indeed, my next guest has warned that he can foresee the UK becoming a poorer country, not just than Italy or Poland, but also India and Argentina. I'm joined now by Matt Ridley, a former member of the House of Lords and a well-known writer. Matt, welcome to State of the Nation. Well, we are called State of the Nation. You've got a very grim prospectus for the nation, haven't you?
Well, I'm afraid I have now. I mean, I'm a rational optimist about the world, but I'm just back from India, and I've seen how there's a dynamic economy there, poverty rapidly falling, and a lot of startups and all that kind of thing. And I'm just worried that if we stagnate in this country, it's unbelievable how quickly we will fall behind the rest of the world. You know, you don't have to go backwards to become poor. If you stop growing, the rest of the world is going to zoom past us in the fast lane, and we will drop down the rankings in per capita GDP to the point where if you take the most optimistic forecast of the world economy for the rest of this century, by the end of the century, the average citizen of planet Earth will be earning $120,000 a year in today's money. Now, that's, way, way more than 4 or 5 times more than us. So if we don't grow, we'll be bottom of the heap. And I just think that the 15 years of stagnation we've experienced and the even worsening of that in the last few months under the Labour government suggests that we really do need shock therapy in this country to get back to the chances of keeping up with our rivals, let alone beating them.
What a shame to hear that. You're normally such an optimistic fellow when I meet you, Matt. Well, what's your diagnosis? Well, we know what that is. But how would you cure the 15 years of ills? Clearly not another Tory government, given they were in charge most of that time.
Well, I'm afraid it is embarrassing how little the Tories achieved in terms of liberating and igniting economic growth. For me, the sort of big ones are energy policy. We've got to get energy cheap and affordable and reliable because that's the absolute lifeblood of a growing economy, of an innovative machine. You can't do anything without energy. The cheaper the energy, the cheaper everything gets, and the more things you can invent and things like that. So it's energy is the sort of very core of what we do. And the second one is freedom. We are just drowned in regulations and restrictions, and it's extraordinarily hard to start a business in this country. It's extraordinarily hard if you've got a business to develop it, to expand it. And there is a lethargy in the regulators.
Yeah. And who do you blame?
I mean, lack of urgency.
Yeah, you're describing what's called the blob, aren't you? And I once asked someone in government, what is the blob? And what they told me was it's well-meaning ministers passing more and more regulations to deal with different things as they occur in normal life. And that builds up into a kind of thicket of red tape that just absorbs any kind of attempt to kill it.
Yeah, I mean, I live just down the road from where George Stephenson invented the steam engine and the railway. And exactly 200 years ago, the Stockton to Darlington Railway was being completed. That was pioneering. That was world-beating. It was the first time anyone went faster than a galloping horse, an extraordinary invention that totally transformed the world. And he needed an act of parliament to build that railway. But once he'd got that through, there was no one to stop him. He didn't have to worry about the newts in the way or his pronouns,
or
whether he was going to affect net zero. The blob, I'm sorry to say, is a real phenomenon. I was in the House of Lords for 9 years, and I saw that it didn't really matter what you said in a debate or how persuasive you were or how well you argued against a minister in the corridor to do something. The minister would go away and come back a week later and say, my civil servants say it can't be done. You think, am I talking to the monkey or the organ grinder here? Who's really in charge in this country?
We need a version of Stephenson's rocket in 21st century politics, it might be, Matt Ridley. Well, thank you for joining us tonight. We do appreciate it. Thank you. Now, elsewhere, the Telegraph is at it again with yet another asylum story dividing the political debate. This time it involves an immigration tribunal overturning a Home Office decision to a migrant who arrived on a small boat across the channel, saying he was not 16 as he claimed, but an adult. It's one of the many recent cases that raise questions about whether our asylum system is fit for purpose, with many suggesting the country needs to withdraw from the European Convention on Human Rights and reform the Human Rights Act. I'm joined again in the studio by my panel, contributing editor to Novara Media, Michael Walker, and assistant comment editor at The Telegraph, Poppy Coburn. To you first, Michael. Do you reckon it's time to leave the ECHR?
I mean, I don't think this one story is probably enough reason to leave the ECHR. I mean, clearly the Telegraph are finding a number of cases where decisions that particular judges have made seem somewhat nonsensical, right? Probably in every country, in all periods of time, you could find the odd decision by a judge that seems a little bit ridiculous. So I think there would be a danger in us finding these somewhat extreme cases and extrapolating too much from them. At the same time, I do actually think, so in lots of these cases, it's one where one judge has said one thing, another judge has said the other, another judge, so it's ping-pong between these different judicial bodies.
Different tiers of justice.
And I wonder if judges should start thinking, if we keep making decisions people think are ridiculous, then that is going to push the government to a position where they have to do something a bit more extreme. So I would say maybe we should just ask the judges to be a bit more, reasonable, less sort of proactive.
We had the
when it
lady,
comes to some of these issues.
Chief Justice Baroness Carr speaking out, didn't we, this week, saying it was wrong for this, another ruling, I think it was about Gazans coming here under Ukrainian laws to allow Ukrainians to come over after the war, saying that shouldn't be criticised. But of course, you have to be able to criticise rulings, don't you, or else where does it leave us?
I mean, it's rule of law, not rule of lawyers, and that used to be a principle that was quite well understood in this country. Although I'm not going to place all the blame solely at the feet of judges. We have to look to politicians. Parliament is sovereign. If Parliament makes a decision, they should be able to carry it out. It is a fact that the Labour government in the last couple of months have removed a Tory policy which meant if an asylum seeker refused to get an age test, they would be automatically assumed to be an adult. This was then taken out by the Labour government, so now we're having these ridiculous cases, as you point out, now being bounced around the system again. So actually, if you want to do something about it, as a politician, it is perfectly within your power to do so.
And Michael, just to read this again, a Sudanese asylum seeker has been declared a child by judges, despite the Home Office saying he's 23 with a receding hairline. I mean, there it is.
Well, from reading it, I feel like the Home Office said that, and then they kind of retracted it. They said he was really old, then they said he was 23. The judge has said, I don't think you've done your documentation very well. I mean, it's one of those cases where often I do think that maybe the Telegraph has extracted sort of one line from a ruling that makes it seem more ridiculous than it is.
The Telegraph here,
well, you're attacking it.
In fact, I would say that the entire immigration system, as it's currently carried out, from the judicial level to the Home Office to politicians, is completely not fit for service. And the fact is, these stories are not just being plucked out of thin air. There is a bounty of stories that we can find.
This guy.
I mean, we could run a story for 10 stories every day, 20, 100 stories every day.
This guy had been shaving for a while. He had thick facial hair, a broad chest, forehead wrinkles and crow's feet.
Well, it sounds like
he's a child.
It sounds like that's also being disputed. I mean, I don't want to intervene too much in this case because I do think that it is...
told off by the Lady Chief Justice.
Well, I do think it is... No, I disagree with her, in fact. I think Keir Starmer was well within his rights to stand up in the House of Commons and say he disagreed with that judge. I'm not sure we know enough about it.
OK, Michael.
Yeah, I mean, let's be clear what's at stake here. If this is a tribunal decision that we disagree with, there is now a man who's potentially in his 20s in a school with teenage girls. If you want to work in a school, you have to get an advanced DBS check. We do not allow random people to walk into school for very good reason. This is a gigantic safeguarding disaster that could have horrific consequences for children. And that's why I don't think these stories are just, clickbaity. They are actually really serious and they affect people's lives in a very serious and negative way.
And it does matter to us who comes into this country. If you go back to why Labour won the election, I think in July, it was about security, control of making families feeling better off, controlling the streets around them, and then the wider border. I mean, that's why I think Labour is a Labour problem.
No, I mean it does matter. I mean, I said earlier, I think sort of judges maybe shouldn't sort of should take into account how their decisions are going to be viewed by the general public. I think that would be sensible. I do think, though, under the Conservatives, what we had was a lot of grandstanding on migration, and what that can do is sort of whip up people feeling very aggrieved about migration while not doing anything about it, which is kind of the worst of both worlds.
Yeah. Poppy?
I've got to agree it's the worst of both worlds. I think people are already pretty aggrieved, but certainly telling everyone that it's bad and then not doing anything is probably a waste of everyone's time.
OK,
we also shouldn't forget the value that migrants bring to this country.
Oh, yes.
As someone who grew up in a very multicultural part of London, lives in a very multicultural part of London, what frustrates me is the right often say, London is this hellhole, it's too dangerous to go out of your home because there's so many people from non-British backgrounds. London is a fantastic place to live.
Understood. Exactly. Thank you for saying that, Michael, and Poppy too. In a moment, I'll be joined by one man who's made it his mission to find out the increasingly pressing question in modern-day Britain: why do people kill? His findings will be revealed straight after the break.
Evening. Welcome to your latest weather update from the Met Office here on GB News. Tomorrow, well, kind of more of the same, but if anything, the winds are going to be a little stronger and there'll be more heavy rain around. We've got warnings in place, as we shall see shortly. It's all coming from down to the southwest. These weather fronts are swiftly moving towards us. Today's weather fronts are actually clearing away, so for many, it's actually a bit drier out there this evening, but it won't last because here comes another batch of rain into Wales, southwest England, then across Northern Ireland through the early hours. Some quite heavy rain, as you can tell by those brighter colours. It's been mild today. It will be mild overnight. Temperatures in many towns and cities holding up in double digits, but it will be blustery. Those winds strengthening further through the morning and that rain marching north across Scotland. Once it's in here, it kind of sets in for a good chunk of the day. So it could cause some flooding problems. We have Met Office yellow rain warnings in place across Scotland and a wind warning for southwest Scotland, the east of Northern Ireland, but also for the coasts of Wales, the west and the south coast. Gusts of 50, 60 miles an hour, maybe 70 miles an hour in exposed places. So yes, very windy in the west, very wet in the west. Much of the Midlands, much of eastern England will be pretty dry through Friday morning. In fact, staying dry for most of the day across east of most counties. But the rain will creep in across the Midlands as it clears from Wales, southwest Scotland, southwest England. Should cheer up a little bit. Some afternoon sunshine is likely, and it will be mild. Temperatures in the teens pretty widely, could squeak up to 15 Celsius. Obviously feeling a little cooler with the wind. The winds ease on Saturday, and for most it's a much drier day. Bit of a question mark about the rain in the southeast. That could still be around for a time through the day, only slowly clearing. And there will be a few showers developing on Saturday, but overall Saturday looks brighter and drier for many with lighter winds, but that doesn't last. Wet and windy weather returns on Sunday. Bye for now.
We're proud to be GB News, the People's Channel, and as you know, we always love to hear your views. Now, there's a new way of getting in touch with us at gbnews.com/yoursay. By commenting, you can be part of a live conversation and join our GB News community. You can even talk to me, Bev Turner, or any of the members of the GB News family.
I'm Christopher Hope. From pop stars to politicians, I'll interview anybody in a pub who's got a political opinion. Join me every Friday on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, YouTube or gbnews.com, or wherever you get your podcasts. This is GB News, the People's Channel.
In the GB Newsroom, we bring you the news as it happens.
With our team of dedicated journalists across the UK,
we're ready to keep you up to date with what's happening every half an hour, every single day. Bulletins here on GB News,
the People's Channel,
Britain's news channel.
Welcome back to State of the Nation with me, Christopher Hope. So why do people kill? Following the Southport killings, the Harvey Wilgoose stabbing or the Sarah Sharif case, this is the question that's been on many of our minds. What compels people to commit such heinous crimes? Well, my next guest has made answering this question one of his missions. Studying 147 cases from January 2023 to December 2024, last Christmas, he's revealed that there were numerous killings in which no motives were established nor sought, and often the motive is even required to secure a conviction. But this means the authorities could be missing out on vital intelligence on why people kill and therefore stopping people killing in the future. I'm joined now by the former BBC Home Affairs correspondent, the great legendary Danny Shaw, who did the work. Danny, what an interesting piece of work you've done here. Why are we not asking why it happens? And we know what happens, but not why.
I think the main reason is because police don't need a motive in order to solve a case. So they focus quite rightly on catching the perpetrator using CCTV, using mobile phone evidence, DNA, fingerprints, gathering statements from witnesses, etc.
Yeah.
And that is enough in many cases to secure a conviction. They don't need to establish the why. But as you say, in doing so, I think they're missing out some vital intelligence. They're also not giving us the answers as to why people actually commit these crimes. What's the trigger? What's the thing that actually propels someone to go in and wield that knife? Is it a moment of jealousy, of envy? Is there something deeper that lies behind it? And I think that is missing.
And of the 147 in the Metropolitan Police area, the biggest police force, a third were by gangs.
Yeah, that's right.
Which we know a lot about gang violence and knives and the rest and why that's embedded. And then other amazing findings here. And you thought, who do you blame here? The court system for not asking more questions, or the police for not needing to find out motive?
Well, I don't blame the police because in many cases, a murder and manslaughter, they bring the perpetrator to justice and they've got a very high clear-up rate, particularly in the Metropolitan Force. So I'm not blaming them for not going after the motive, but I think there should be some research, some more work done to try and establish what exactly it is. I mean, gangs, that figure surprised me. 35% These are cases that concluded at court, so we can talk about those cases. We know...
In that period?
Yes, in that period. We know about the background, because obviously when a murder happens this week, we don't know what lies behind it. You don't know until a case concludes at court. So 35% of those cases were gang or group related. That really shocked me, that figure, because what that means is that there are over 150 young people, it's mainly young people, were imprisoned in those 2 years for gang or group-related violence. Now, that's just people in terms of murder and manslaughter cases. There will be hundreds of others, gangsters, involved in other sorts of crimes who will also be going to prison. Now, what's that doing to our prisons? Why are people so attracted by gangs and groups? What is it about that? Are we doing enough? Are the police doing enough to try and disrupt those gangs' activities and stop people being drawn into the world of gangs?
I know you used to advise Yvette Cooper when she's in opposition. Have you sought to get this information to her or her team or Shabana Mahmood over in Justice?
They will have seen this. I mean, it's been well publicised, so hopefully they will be picking up and seeing it, and it may not tell them much that they don't know. But the one thing I think that they perhaps ought to focus on is this issue around gangs, because it's the government mission to cut knife crime by half and also violence against women and girls. If they want to cut knife crime by half, then they need an approach that focuses on gangs.
How easy was it to find the information? I mean, you're a very respected journalist. You did your own work, didn't you, with press releases and some local reporting. Was it quite hard to find the information?
Well, what you need to do is collect all the metropolitan press releases when a case concludes at court, and that, you know, it's something that involves just rigorously going through and not missing it. And then obviously there are some gaps, and I don't claim that I've covered every single case that concluded. I've probably missed a few. And then you have to look for judges' sentencing remarks and also media reports and try and find reliable information in that. This is just a start. This isn't a peer-reviewed piece of work. No. I'm not claiming it is, but it gives an indication of where some of the trends and patterns.
It comes in a week when the Home Secretary announced plans to ban online knife sales, and that's been criticised on our channel by saying knives are in kitchen drawers. I mean, that isn't often the problem. It's the motive of the person doing it. So it talks to that point, doesn't it?
Well, look, if you're going to tackle knife crime, you've got to go at it from all sorts of different angles, and, you know, making it harder for people to get hold of knives, and particularly the really deadly swords that we're seeing, the machetes, the zombie knives. That's one element of it, Chris. I'm not saying that's going to stop the problem completely, but it might make some people think twice about it, make it harder for other young people to get hold of knives, as well as the other measures that we need to see as well, which is, you know, around sentencing. I mean, one thing, look, it goes against the grain at the moment, and certainly in terms of prisons, but do we need a minimum sentence for knife possession as we do for carrying a gun? If you're caught with a firearm, it's a minimum term of 5 years. We don't have that for knife possession.
And just quickly, what next? You've done the work now. Well, is that your job done, or are you going to do some more work more nationally?
Well, I'm still collecting data from other years. I think doing something nationally would be useful as well, and perhaps trying to drill down more into some of these cases to see if there is a motive that hasn't been uncovered.
Well, Dan, she'll come back in the report when you've got the more information. We'll keep banging on about this. It's really interesting. Thank you for joining us tonight on State of the Nation. Danny Shaw there, the former BBC Home Affairs correspondent. Now, up next is Patrick Christis. Patrick, are you there? Patrick, what's on your show?
OK, well, we are waiting for Nigel Farage to take the stage at CPAC, so we will bring that to you live. I suspect he's going to be a bit punchier on stage than he was on his GB News show, so watch out for that. In other news, no Gazan refugees should come to Britain. We saw the scenes of them out there with their children today, those Palestinians cheering the coffins of Israeli babies. There's your poor Gazan refugees. No, I'm sorry, they should not come. We're also going to be talking about a Syrian sex offender, a Sri Lankan paedophile and a Sudanese man pretending to be a child, all of whom are allowed to stay in Britain because of their human rights. Absolutely shocking stuff. So we're going to be talking about all of that. And the debate is going to be whether or not J.D. Vance is right to criticise Starmer to his face about free speech in Britain.
It's a brilliant show, Patrick. I'll be tuning in. Thank you. Thank you for joining us. Thank you for my panel tonight. And wherever you are, thanks for watching. That's all for today. Coming up is the weather. I'll be back covering State of the Nation again tomorrow night, Friday night. Stay tuned. Thank you.
Even though we'll see a cloudy start, it'll be a bright outlook for the rest of the day. Boxed Solar, sponsors of weather on GB News.
Evening. Welcome to your latest weather update from the Met Office here on GB News. Tomorrow, well, kind of more of the same, but if anything, the winds are going to be a little stronger and there'll be more heavy rain around. We've got warnings in place, as we shall see shortly. It's all coming from down to the southwest. These weather fronts are swiftly moving towards us. Today's weather fronts are actually clearing away, so for many, it's actually a bit drier out there this evening, but it won't last because here comes another batch of rain into Wales, southwest England, then across Northern Ireland through the early hours. Some quite heavy rain, as you can tell by those brighter colours. It's been mild today. It will be mild overnight. Temperatures in many towns and cities holding up in double digits, but it will be blustery. Those winds strengthening further through the morning and that rain marching north across Scotland. Once it's in here, it kind of sets in for a good chunk of the day, so it could cause some flooding problems. We have Met Office yellow rain warnings in place across Scotland and a wind warning for southwest Scotland, the east of Northern Ireland, but also for the coasts of Wales, the west and the south coast. Gusts of 50, 60 miles an hour, maybe 70 miles an hour in exposed places. So yes, very windy in the west, very wet in the west. Much of the Midlands, much of eastern England will be pretty dry through Friday morning. In fact, staying dry for most of the day across easternmost counties. But the rain will creep in across the Midlands as it clears from Wales, southwest Scotland, southwest England. Should cheer up a little bit. Some afternoon sunshine is likely, and it will be mild. Temperatures in the teens pretty widely. Could squeak up to 15 Celsius. Obviously feeling a little cooler with the wind. The winds ease on Saturday, and for most it's a much drier day. Bit of a question mark about the rain in the southeast. That could still be around for a time through the day, only slowly clearing. And there will be a few showers developing on Saturday, but overall Saturday looks brighter and drier for many with lighter winds, but that doesn't last. Wet and windy weather returns on Sunday. Bye for now.
There will be a light breeze in the morning, leading to a warm front. Boxed heat pumps, sponsors of weather on GB News.
Want to be one of 2 lucky Great British Giveaway winners? That's right, you could win one of 2 prize bundles, which includes a brand new iPhone 16, £500 in shopping vouchers to spend in your favourite store, and an incredible £10,000 in tax-free cash to spend however you like. What would you spend that cash on? For another chance to win, text cash to 63232. One entry costs £2 plus 1 standard network rate message, or text bonus to 63232. 5 entries cost £5 plus 1 standard network rate message. Go to gbnews.com/win. Entries start from just £2. Call 0903 681 3232. Calls cost £2 plus your network access charge, or post your name and number to GB11 PO Box 8690 Derby DE1 9TT. UK only. Entrance must be 18 or over. Lines close at 6 p.m. on the 7th of March. Please check the closing time if listening or watching on demand. Good luck.
It's Patrick Christie's Tonight, and here we do things differently. It's explaining the absolute madness of this, doesn't it? It's explosive. I mean, this is very good. It's lively.
850. Your government sat there, Sean, and it did nothing.
It's controversial. And the Middle East has been in turmoil since before I was born. It's everything you need to kickstart your evening. Everyone's had their Weetabix tonight. I love to see it. That's Patrick Christie's Tonight, weeknights from 9 p.m. Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Good Afternoon Britain isn't just about us. The wonderful thing about this programme is it's about everyone watching. It's an interactive programme.
Well, there absolutely is something to see here, and we're going to be talking about it more. Whether it's breaking royal news, Will, please bring us up to date, or indeed a particularly punchy speech in the House of Commons.
Very, very curious.
We bring it to you live, and then we bring you live reaction as well.
That's Good Afternoon Britain, weekdays from midday.
Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.